Good afternoon and welcome to the Webster Report Plus. I know it's been a long time since I've done a show or anything like that. It's there's a lot been going on for me at my end. A lot of serious stuff, personal attacks, blah blah blah, all that kind of caper. It's put me in a position where I've had to reflect and take account of a lot of stuff, which is still continuing and ongoing. But despite still being nervous about coming back on today, I had a 4-hour chat with the guy who's going to come on the show now. I had a 4-hour chat with him where he basically had to put up with me listening to everything that was going on and things like that. Personal stuff. It's not the best of worlds that we live in right now. Socially, it's an absolute mess, and that's without anything else extra on top. Just trying to go to work, earn your living, pay your bills. For ordinary people, it's not been able to work because of the mental stress and anxiety that this pandemic has spread out over 14 months. Yet people are just looking at Wimbledon, Ascot, the Euros. No social distancing, no masks. The masks are not going. People are isolating. People aren't having sports days at school yet. Oh, this is going on. There's something not right. Is this now going to be blamed on another third wave? There is going to be a third wave, but we're not going to know whether it's the vaccinated people or the unvaccinated, or a combination of both, because nobody's asked the questions right up to this point. And now it's changed people's mental health so badly. They're using language that they would never have used 2 years ago. Hey, I caught coronavirus. No, you don't. You can't catch coronavirus. You don't catch coronavirus. That's grammar that we've never used before. It's everything's being changed very subtly, but people are experiencing mental health issues now. People who are now going to refuse tests or jabs or anything like that, is that now going to come under the Mental Health Act? Because the Mental Health Act was changed with the coronavirus bill. Only one medical professional can section somebody now. So you asking questions about anything against the narrative could put you in a very delicate position. And it's not the bad people that put people on cattle cars and send them to re-education camps. It's the good people who conform when the rules are unjust. And the rules are unjust. You can't justify this lockdown through a pandemic of figures that do not add up. They really don't add up. I don't care about you stamping your feet and crying about it. The figures don't add up. The statistics alone from ONS state that we had a billion surge in population over the past year. So one of the worst pandemic ever, we increased 1 billion people on this planet. I don't know what to say. Mass majority of people who died are over 84 with underlying medical issues. But everybody knows somebody who's died from it, who's never been ill for anything. I just can't. I can't take all that in as truth when somebody who wants to ask questions is called names or shut down or taken off things. You've got experts. People are claiming experts are saying you shouldn't do this. Well, there's experts who have had their licenses suspended, lost their jobs, careers potentially, because they're saying we shouldn't be doing this mass vaccine rollout because, number one, it's not a vaccine. It's gene therapy. It's creating antibodies for an infection that you might not have. So therefore, it won't recognise infection. There's all these questions. The spike proteins from this gene therapy being passed on in generations through fetuses. Are we asking these questions? Is it going to make people sterile? We've not asked these questions because everybody's gone and had a jab, 2 jabs potentially, coming up for 3 in September, without knowing what it is, without these companies being liable because it's been rushed through on emergency management legislation, which means you are part of trials. You've signed up for trials. It doesn't matter what happens to you. There's nobody liable unless you start doing something now about it. But it's one of those, isn't it? People who I know, family, friends who I love and care about, double jab, and I have nothing but stress and worry about that on top of everything else. So with that little bit of an introduction, I'm going to introduce Alex now. Alex is going to introduce himself a lot better than I can and a lot more articulate, no doubt about that. Alex, welcome to the show. We've come back on air. We're trying to come from a little bit of a different approach. That's why it's Webster Report Plus, because we want to go into the psychology of this. We want to know where these people are coming from, i.e. when they use things like the Tavistock Institute and the things that they've investigated, the experimentation, they've been doing this a long time. They know the herd species and they know what they can trigger them with. You've got qualifications in all that, so you're going to sort it all out for us, aren't you, Alex?
Well, hopefully. You never know. Yeah, well, it's obviously, as you've intimated, it's a massive area, Paul. Massive area. And you touched briefly on just mental health, and it's obvious, I think, to everybody by now, 18 months in, that people's mental health under the lockdown conditions mental health has been compromised and people have been struggling. We all know people perhaps who have, with suicide, and some have actually committed suicide. So there's been a great deal of upheaval and trauma that people have had to deal with, and that's just a small part of it. Now, when you look at how huge it is, we've got to start somewhere. So in terms of an introduction, I think what could be interesting is, so my name is Alex Brocklehurst. So what does that tell anybody? Well, it tells them my name. Now, if I had my photo album that my mum and dad put together from way before I were born, I could pull out some photographs of my mum and my dad holding me as a newborn. And that's a photograph of me. It's a representative cross-section of who I might be, in some sense, taken in 1968. It's in colour, it's not in black and white, so that's a better representation of what I actually look like. If I'd been black and white, that would have been a compromised one. So colour, they've added a bit of colour. We're in the age of technology. But am I that baby? Well, clearly I'm not that baby, but is that baby me? Okay, so you start to get to these sorts of questions about, so if I reminisce about that person that I was when I was born, and there's a photograph that sort of says, oh, this is Alex. Well, that was Alex Brocklehurst. Or maybe I hadn't been christened by then, but let's just say that I had been. Well, in theory, I'm the same person. So what's changed? So we've got our identities. I've got 53 years since that time to become a person. And I could have become a number of different people on a number of different timelines based on all the choices that I made. So if we simply look at myself as a catalogue of events, happenings, birthday parties, experiences at Christmas, jobs that I've had, football teams that I've supported, brands of clothing that I've worn, there are certainly certain markers that might tell you something about the external story of me. But the reality of me is much more complex, and we don't even need to get to sophisticated, areas of debate like theological ones to start, waxing lyrical about the nature of a human being. We can see at face value that people develop in a number of different ways, that at least apparently they're able to make a range of different choices that make a difference to the outcome of their life. And yet all of us are at the point we're at now. And in that sense, we're all a product of every choice that we've ever made. And we don't have to go back to a photograph of ourselves when we're a baby. We can look in the mirror now and say, is that me? Well, in a strange sense, of course, what I see, that visual representation reflected back to me, is me. But then at the same time, it isn't me. So the question of what a human being is, even before I start to try and describe to you who I am, is in itself a fairly massive question, which is complicated by the fact that we don't live in a vacuum. We live in a world where we don't have 100% control over everything that happens. I mean, I wouldn't like to hazard a guess at how much percentage control we do have over the things that happen. It's actually really quite small. And yet we take that as free will. We take that within that very narrow bandwidth of things that we can actually do in this huge world, that's actually still quite a massive thing. You know, even that very small percentage of control that we've got, from our point of view, seems very big. And we make choices from the point of view of this conscious perspective we have on the world. I can get to the end of the street, I can turn left, I can turn right. As long as the off license isn't closed or some other shop isn't closed by 10 o'clock, I can go down and buy half a dozen eggs if I want. Now, when lockdown happens, somebody says outside of yourself again, right, well, we're closing those shops, we're closing that pub, and that has an immediate implication for your freedom. Because in theory, you could be free to walk to the end of your road. You could be free to walk up to Rivington Pike for those of us who are local to the Bolton area. But there are other things that we're not free to do anymore as individuals and groups when the government intervenes in the way that it does. So we've got this really interesting interaction between who a person is, which isn't as simple as it appears. We're actually layers of stories within which we have quite a bit of choice and also not very much choice. And that's a fluctuating thing. So we've got all that going on. And then we've got this increasingly complex world around us, which we tend to call reality. And we don't always know that what we're looking at is actually real. So when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we think, oh, that's me. Yeah, that's real. And it is me and it isn't me. So this world that we look at, it kind of is a real world. And in some ways, it feels like a very strange world that we can't relate to from 18 months ago. So that said, I was born in 1968. I was brought up for the first few years of my life in a terraced house in Farnworth, about 3 miles outside of Bolton. And from there, I moved up to a part of Bolton, and I was living in this house really for, I suppose, the best part of another 30 odd years, maybe that. And then I left home, started to make my own way in the world. I ended up doing 2 degrees in theology, a bachelor's degree at a theological college in Manchester. And then I did a master's degree in theology that was specifically looking at the relationship of theology to contemporary society in some of the ways that I've just been talking about in terms of its complexity, and asking these sorts of questions. Well, what is it to be a human being in a modern world, and what is the modern world? What does it consist of? So you've got those 2 complex factors. So, you know, there I was thinking about these things, exploring these questions, studying theology from the point of view, I suppose, in some ways of a theologian, trying to make sense of my meaning from a religious, spiritual or faith point of view, but also philosophically, because I was able to see that not all questions necessarily have an obvious connection to questions about God. And I became very interested in wisdom traditions, because at the end of the day, you know, if we live wisely, it's pretty obvious that we have a much better probability of living productively than if we live unwisely. Now, some people learn this pretty quickly, and other people seem to spend a whole life falling into the same hole over and over again. It seemed to me that the sooner we wise up, so to speak, the better. And I started on a quest of self-improvement, which I think had been going for a long time, really. When I finished my first degree, I studied in 1994 a part-time youth work training course, and I started to do sessional youth work. I was passionate about young people's development, children's development. Subsequently to doing some sessional work in youth work, I worked with other disability groups. Then I ended up getting a job working in mental health, ultimately in vocational rehabilitation. So I suppose it's probably about 23 years of experience that I had working in mental health. And obviously that's related to issues that, obviously, when I've been passionate about being a youth worker, I'd wanted to try and head off some of the problems that you see become full blown later in life if the schooling system lets people down, if authority figures and parents let us down, if we encounter certain types of trial and trauma that we can't get assistance with. We end up with what we might call a mental health scrap heap.
Let me just pause you there then for a sec, what you've just laid out. That education system, you said, lets us down. I say it does exactly what it says on the tin.
Right, okay.
I think that's why. I think it's our understanding of the systems that are all in place. The education system, everything's open to you if you actually know how to operate within that system. But the restrictions, everybody's got to be cut into this shape. Now, what do you want to do? I don't know. Well, if we'd have spoken to you at between 5 and 8, you might want to be a train driver, an astronaut, or something. And then by the time you get to 11, you might want to be something else. You've grown. So if we ask you this all the way through, like when we used to have apprenticeships and things like that, you could actually stay, from the age of 8 up to the age of 14. You've said you want to build houses. You want to be in construction. Yes, I love it. So for that 8 years, you would have given them something within the system of them being able to progress along to do that as a course all the way through from the very basics, getting right up to apprenticeships. But all that has been taken and all put onto paper. So now all we look at is paper and not people. And the worst thing that has happened throughout the public sector and private sectors is that businesses are able to go off paper. Tick boxes, I've done my bit, I've done my job. Look, I've saved £2.5 million. You've just killed 14 people. No, I'm not. I've just saved money. No, you've just killed 14 people. People who are getting put into management places, in charge of things, are all working off paper. As long as it's all signed up and all the boxes are ticked, they don't care if that impacts on people or not. That is the mentality that are going through all these managements, from public sector and private sector. The public sector treat their employees like shite. Absolutely terrible. From the NHS, the police, fire, ambulance, prison, every public sector service, the people are treated like shite as long as the paperwork looks good. That's got to change. But that's got to change with people. Now, when you've got that education system and you've got parents who've gone through that education system, you get taught the same things. So that is why the education system and my parents taught me to work hard and pay my bills in a debt-based economy, Alex. So working hard and paying for the bills that I've got obligations to set off, he's not doing his bit, he's not doing anything, we're going to have to add interest. That's all the government do. That's all they do. You're not doing it right, so we have to take stuff off you. Well, we're taught to not do it right. So rather than calling people names who are pointing out that you've been doing it wrong and your parents have been doing it wrong all this time, be humble enough to accept that you don't know everything. Be humble. But there's not much humility out in this society at the minute. It's ruled by egos who, it's sickening. It's absolutely sickening. You can't have conversations with people anymore, Alex. And I think that has got a lot to do with that education system. You being interested in psychology, you actually using the tools of psychology to actually not only dig yourself out and find out who you are, because as we get into this more and more, you'll divulge stuff. What you were 30, 40 years ago is not what you are now. And that's not just because of happenstance and you're bouncing off this wall and that wall. It's because you've made decisions and you've gone, that was a whopper. I don't want to make that decision again. I've done a lot of that on alcohol and made some horrendous decisions. So that's how you learn. But you've been taught to do the wrong things from straight off the bat.
Yeah, no, it's right, Paul. I'd say it's pretty obvious that most people succeed if they succeed in life. despite the educational system, not because of it. But interestingly, for those people who go through the educational system, it should be possible for a natural organism to understand what a natural and conducive environment is like. So if your brain's working properly, right, it should be possible to recognize when something's dysfunctional or optimally functional. So we do need to trust the fact that well-adjusted and well-adapted organisms will be able to, even from quite early on in life, show a good adaptation to that environment. And if something's wrong, there are anomalies, shall we say, that it's possible for people to make adjustments, not because the system tells them to do something, but because they recognize a disconnect between what the system appears to be suggesting and what that person's actual experience dictates to them. Now, that we call that cognitive dissonance, if you want to use the fancy language. It's when plausibility structures and the reality that we're confronted with or appear to be confronted with doesn't gel with what our eyes and our other senses tell us. So, for example, things like Disneyland in Florida, Disneyland in Paris is a very good example that some prominent theorists have spoken about, using a word called hyperreality. I won't get too technical about it, but what it does is kind of this American dream idea of supersize me. Everything becomes bigger, larger than life, large Mickey Mouse characters, and suddenly you've created this fantasy world as if it's desirable for kids to live in a Disney movie. And that, if we could go to one of these theme parks, and if only life could always be like this, what a wondrous life it would be. Now, in order to buy into that utter nonsense, people have got to have been successfully conditioned and, in some senses, removed from the immediacy of what their senses tell them, which, you can imagine primitive, cave people, prehistoric hominids or whatever. They're milling around and they understand that drinking pure water is actually very important, and that if you get contaminants in the water, there could be catastrophic consequences. And they understand that, whether it's hunter-gathering, because obviously farming didn't come till later, that they've got to find a way of producing, sustaining food and clothing. And generally speaking, they have a strong alignment with the natural environments of which they're a part. And that means there isn't a massive disconnect between, their experience and an objective or external reality. And what we find in the modern world increasingly, with everything speeding up, we're living in a data age. Things are faster and faster, the number crunching, the processing power. We are now exposed, arguably bombarded by so much information that our brains, powerful as they are struggling to be able to process all this incoming information in a coherent way. And what that does, unfortunately, if people can't reduce that flow, they can become overwhelmed. And then you get into really interesting and difficult territory, because it's bad enough if one person can be affected by that, but once literally everyone is, let's just say, to use a parlance, plugged in, and they're all focusing their attention on this world that's created, say, through Netflix, then they're immediately being moved away from their immediate physical sensory environment by giving or loaning their conscious attention to something beyond them. And now, when you get into those sorts of states so chronically as we have, particularly in recent times, last decade or so, the gap is bigger and bigger and bigger between our immediate locality and this ever-increasing world out there. And in order to keep our anchors or our grounding, it's increasingly challenging, and people have kind of been shrugging their shoulders and not knowing what to do. So a big part of what we really need to do, I'll be looking at, is, I suppose, giving people the technology again without becoming like a regressive hermit going living in a cave again and saying, pass, I don't want to bother with this new reality, this modern world. If we're not going to be ostriches sticking our head in the sand, we've got to find a way of saying, how can I adjust? How can I adapt? How can I somehow evolve as a human being, as a personal, entity living in this world, while this world is moving on a pace and potentially leaving lots of people behind, without necessarily feeling we need to go down this transhuman, techno-human paradigm which is being ushered in with human augmentation. This, for some people, is the next stage of human evolution, and for others, it's a horror show. And that's a big part of what we're dealing with now, that our brains really are struggling to keep up with this information. And this is why people like Elon Musk and others are looking at these sort of brain computer interfaces where you could have direct contact, direct access to Google. You don't even have to use your fingers anymore to type in a search engine. So the new ideal, the new, wet dream of the oligarchs is to be able to have this techno society where you can almost have this superhuman being, and they sell that as if, isn't that going to be brilliant? Think of all the things you can do. But if you went back to that hominid, yeah, he's probably not going to be getting on a rocket to the moon anytime soon. But arguably,
don't start the debate already, mate.
Arguably, he's going to be a lot more content in his skin doing those simple things. Now, I'm not saying by that, as I've already said, that we should go retro and go and live in caves and scratch around in the mud like on Monty Python and the Holy Grail. But there's clearly a balance to be struck when we're looking at what's going on in the world now. It's things are moving on a pace. People feel like they're being left behind. Lockdown has led to certain social re-engineering. So, people are not being allowed access in their freedom to go to places they always used to take for granted. So they're now facing this like existential crisis in themselves. So who am I? Who am I then? What is this world? Where do I seek and discover answers? And so that's going to be a really large part of, on a continuing basis, hopefully, that we'll be trying to unpack, and hopefully with people's audience questions and participation. Obviously we're out live now. I don't know how many people are following. Some people have watched this pre-recorded. But if we can get enough people to sort of want to participate in this debate, we need to give them a voice too, where they can talk about, well, I'm confronting this type of situation and I don't really know how to approach it in a way that's going to get me the results I'm looking for. Now, if we can in some way be instrumental in assisting people to make sense of these dilemmas by putting them in the fullest possible context, we'll have performed a really worthwhile service. But first of all, we have to understand the territory that is complex. And I'm going to shut up in a minute and let you come back with a few points, but I'll probably have an illustration. I think I'll make an illustration in a short while about the complexity as a model of how we should perhaps navigate, and then we can explore that at some point in the future. But yeah, that's the basic take that I've got on it. So much is happening, so much pace of change, that it's very difficult for human beings to keep up with that and still retain a sense of being centered. It's quite overwhelming, obviously.
Well, I joined a few. I join dots all the time, but there's a few dots that I want to bring forward. If you don't know your history, whatever our history is, and we all know that history is written by the winners, his story, yes, we all know that, but we have to take that collective of information. So we take what we're taught as history, and then if there's anything else after that, we've got to use it to balance what we're taught up, because we won, so we're taught the winners. There's a massive slant on everything. So, again, be humble enough to be able to go and ask childish questions, just childlike questions. The things that I'm seeing is when you go to Nuremberg 1, right, because I say Nuremberg 1 because I'm sure there's going to be a Nuremberg 2 with what has been going on with all this. Goering was asked, how did you get the German people to blindly go along? Fear. The more fear we put into the German people, the more we could do. The more we did, the less they thought we were doing it. That is psychology of the herd. The Tavistock Institute has got, I don't know how many studies on the herd mentality. You don't need everybody. You don't even need a critical mass. You just need enough to be talking in certain areas. When you covered the mainstream and they're all talking about cases, brilliant. Loads of cases. How many are ill? Oh, I don't know. Well, shouldn't you know? Well, you have no symptoms. This is all convenient because it's never happened before, ever, with the flu. People say it's not flu, this is COVID. Well, if SARS-CoV-2 mutated to COVID, then we've isolated that strain and we can see what it looks like and we can show everybody. And then when it's changed into the South African one, we can say, well, that was COVID. This is now COVID mutated. So that's the, well, we haven't done the first one. So if we don't do the first one, we can't have any other variants. And when these mutate, they dilute. So they don't get stronger. But what if people have been given antibodies to an infection that the body hasn't seen, so it's now allowing infections through? We can't ask that question. Is any of it passed on to our children? Is it going to make them sterile? We don't know, because we're all signing up for trials. We're all signing up for experimentation. It says it. They tell you, but people won't believe it because Sky News is saying there's 79,000 cases today and 22 people have died. Well, of the 22 people died of, how old were they? Did they have any underlying? Have they been perfectly well and they've just got this? Have you like done the post-mortem and found? None. Nothing. It's just the telly that says it. And people go, it's the telly. It's the telly. And I don't know what to say to those people because it gets me angry. Because I've been there 10 years ago where I came home and watched Emmerdale, EastEnders, Coronation Street. I've done all that. But there's real things going on here. Devastating things where people have changed their entire lives with gene therapy jabs of not knowing what it's about, all based on fear. And I've just told you one quote from history. How did you get them to do it? Lied to them, made them scared. It's teaching children.
There's one of the points here that's important is humans, we're finite, so we're living within boundaries, body boundaries, and that means we can only be in one place at once. And sometimes we need sources. We need to rely on sources of information that didn't come from ourselves. I mean, the ideal scenario, you'd be able to vet every source in advance and absolutely verify that that source is correct, so that you would have an absolutely certain foundation for your own action based on all your own judgments about that data. Sadly, we don't live in a world, because of our own finitude, where we have the luxury of not relying on sources. So all we can do is vet them. The problem is you've got a false split now between these two extremes. If people become paranoid, right, and that happens a lot in the truth movement, where they don't trust anything, they question everything implicitly, and that's it. And that's their default position. Everything's suspect. Everybody's a potential shill, and what that is, it's just really self-confusing. Then on the other side, you get the other side of the spectrum, where people implicitly trust in everything authority tells them. Now, the golden mean is somewhere in the middle. But one thing is for sure: if you're not able to trust yourself, then you're going to have to trust external authority. So before we even look at the big picture, we've got to look at the quality of people's relationship to the self, whether they trust themselves, and that's in terms of their theories about the world, whether they're accurate, whether they've tested them. It's emotionally. Do I trust myself emotionally that when I make this decision, I'm not going to be making a big mess up? Often that's because they've got a lack of emotional experience. They've been hurt in the past. They've been in pain. They become scared of making the same mistake again, and therefore they can't mature emotionally. So the problem is, it does come back in that sense to the fullest notion that we can embrace about what it is to be a human being, to have psychology, ideas.
You froze a bit there, Alex.
And you hear me. But ultimately, we need to be able to trust ourselves. But then we've got to ask, well, we're coming back to this question of what is a self then? So there's not much we can do about this world. In a sense, we've got agency. There are little things we can do. But on the big structural decisions, there's very little that we can do immediately to influence government, because it's a different level of agency that we've got access to. Sure, you can become a grassroots activist and then become a local politician and that might take you all your life, and then you've got to start toadying, selling your soul in order to get influence. By the time you get that influence, you're so sold out that you're a part of the system anyway. So realistically, there is agency that the individual can reach, but generally speaking, it's better to deal with what you can deal with. So what I would just say is what I was hinting at before about this model of a human being and a human life. If you imagine life as a journey from A, when you're born, to Z, when you die, there isn't just one journey, but let's call that the overarching journey from A to Z, from birth to death. Within that journey from A to Z, there are all kinds of cul-de-sacs, little diversions, other subpaths that you can go on, and they've got their own miniature A to Zs, and they're micro journeys, small journeys, tasks that you have to complete, goals that you seek to achieve. But underlying it all, if we just simplify it and say we're going from A to Z, you start off at A, a baby, and you're not a consciously developed individual. You've got sensory experiences, you're connected to mother via the breast and so on and so forth. You don't develop a personality really in it of any sort of type till about the age of 5. Yeah, you've got these characteristics, but a sense of self at least. So a lot of the early steps are obscure anyway, and that's why we're looking back at photographs to try and jog our memory or little snippets of things that happen, but most of it gets lost. But a point comes in our life, our adult life usually, where we become conscious that we've got to E. And when we realise and become aware that we're at point E, we can then look back and realise there was an A, B, C and D. And we might then realise also on this journey towards Z, our next step is going to be F. So if you think of that person in each of these stages, you've been through A, B, C and D, you're now in E, you become conscious that you've come from A through to E, you know the next step might be F, but then you yourself are a complex of different experiences, right? A set of subsystems that exist within you. Let's parallel it to functions of the body. Let's just say the head and the feet, right? And all the other bits in between. So let's just say you have a crisis or a difficulty or a set of challenges in one area of your life, and we'll parallel that with the head. And you sort that whole area out. Well, that's had a knock-on effect on all of the systems in your life. Even when you make changes and can consciously embrace those changes and bring about change in order to move to F, there'll be hang-ons that have not rippled through to the rest of your system. B, C, D, E. Might take a while for those changes to get from the head to the feet. So what happens? We're then in transition. Whenever we seek to change or we become more aware, what happens is we lose the foundations that we currently had. Most humans are creatures of habit. They get used to doing things in routines. I'll take the kids to this at this time. I'll take them to Scouts or Brownies at night. We'll have this structure. When they've got that basic structure, they want it to remain stable. And then the ideal seems to be, if I can keep doing the same thing over and over again every day and every week, that's the kind of life I want. But then after a while, they scratch their head and they go, I'm bored. So at some point, if something doesn't come in from outside or the person doesn't generate some new meaning from inside, they might start to atrophy. They want these routines that give them a sense of security, but then they get bored. So when we change and when we become aware and when we want to evolve and we want to move from E to F, certain things change within us that have a knock-on effect in other areas that destabilizes us. So the problem then is what we do. In some ways, we evolve faster than we're capable of evolving. And we have to then tell ourselves a story. So we say, oh, yeah, I changed that bit in my head. So I used to be this person before when I was in D, and now I'm in E. And I had some realizations now I'm at point E. And all these things in my head, I had to change them in order to move forward into F. And then we think, right, well, what was I before? Who have I become now? And then we retell the story of who we are in order to enter into F. But we're still carrying a lot of these other changes that are still rippling through in the system. So we need to tell ourselves stories about who we are just in order to be able to function. But we're much more than the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And we can lose our equilibrium very easily. But on this journey of life, these steps from A to Z, and all the subpaths that we can go on, we've got all these subsystems within us that are seeking to be in equilibrium, seeking to have a sort of order that we can, have predictable behavioral patterns built upon. But there's a shortfall, there's a tension. And whenever we change and whenever we make that decision to grow, there's a pain or there's a cost involved. And this is why most people want to stay at the level, pardon me saying this, but, I've said it many times to friends, we share 99% of our DNA with chimpanzees. Now, we can make a choice as to whether we live at the level of a chimpanzee, make rudimentary tools, or whether we aspire to higher cultural pursuits, all the other possibilities of our life, and to grow. But the more we commit to that path, especially when others around us are not committing to that path. It is much easier to join the herd, as you said, to not stand out, to not piss people off at work, to not draw attention to yourself because my life is easier. So we then make that choice to not stick out. We don't want to be the black sheep of the family. We don't always want to not be invited to things. So we make our choices, and it's either a choice to evolve and grow, or it's a choice to stay where everybody else is, milling around, consuming products, and not thinking about very much. And it's those people who are susceptible to these deceptions because they've almost got to believe that the people who are wetnessing them and putting the nappies on them are going to come along and take the nappies off because they've decided they don't want to mature. And it's our job, first of all, to make sure that we're examples and role models of what it is to grow, to mature, to confront these difficult questions of life, and to become a whole human being. It's not easy. That's why most people say no. But we don't have that luxury anymore, Paul. In this third decade of the 21st century, things are racing ahead out of our control because we've said pass, and we've let a few ragingly mad oligarchs dictate the whole show, and everybody said pass. Now, that is not sustainable. That's the problem.
Yeah. The cognitive dissonance that has been created over this past year, and like I say, I think the education system over the last 30 years has been ramped up to dumb children down. I mean, some of the simple maths equations for primary school kids, the equation itself, you needed a degree. Well, I would have needed a degree in mathematics to just understand how the hell are you working that out. Whereas my argument was always, if you've got like a 0 taking away 8, well, obviously 0 can't take away 8, so you borrow one. Well, people then say to me, well, where have you borrowed it from? Well, it doesn't matter. Just put that mark there, it's there, and then when you've used it, put the mark down at the bottom. But where'd you get that from to do that? And then you put it there. So, well, it doesn't matter. You'll get it right. That's the mechanism of it. You'll get it right. Now, for me, Alex, if I've got the right answer, if I know it's right, I don't care how I've got to it. Do I want to spend an hour deducting this, analysing that? If somebody goes, well, if you do that, you've got it right. Okay. I won't need to know where it's come from. I won't need to know if I've gone next door to borrow one sugar, and then I've got to go back next door to give it them back, because that's just a tool for me to understand it. Whereas I want you to give it me easy, straight. Just give it me simple. Oh, right, I'll do that. Press that button and that's it. Yes, you've got it right. Dink. That's it. Now, people might want to go, well, how have you understood that? Okay, you've got it right. Now understand it. You don't have to try and understand it before you get it right. Because how many people get things right? How the hell have I done that? How have I just done that? Oh, well, I did this. That's how it worked. That's how we work as humans. You said we share 99% of DNA with chimpanzees. That's all we share. For me, I've not evolved from that, because my mentality is different to that. I have an understanding, maybe it's a connection, maybe it's a spiritual connection. If there's anything what these jabs are going to do, possibly, I mean, you've been talking about this for over 100 years, with vaccines. They said they would be able to possibly turn off the soul connection with vaccines. They have talked about that in their own white papers. Now, does that make me a conspiracy theorist? Does that make me a nutter? Or have I read what they wish they could do? Well, when I was talking about mandatory vaccines 10 years ago, where people at work would walk past me with tinfoil on their heads and go, oh, where be dickhead, mandatory vaccines. Those same people now say, you were talking about this 10 years ago. And look, I went, why are you so shocked? It's what they wished they could do. The Rockefeller Foundation 2010 Lockstep program, go and read it. You'll have understood why last year was what it is. Now, what I liken it to, Alex, is child grooming, it's child abuse. The general public had everything took off them and then given them something back. So they were punished, then rewarded. Then it's taken off them again, and a little bit more is given back. So this is a child groomer. Hey, come on, it's our secret. There's a big bar of chocolate. There's a new bike. There's a new car. This is where all the incentives. They pay people to stay at home. They pay people for a year to stay at home. They are pioneering universal credit in Wales because they've got the mass majority of people to stay at home. Who are you going to listen to and take note of if you are being paid by them? Who will you vote for? Who will you listen to? We had it with Obama. He gave the poor people free mobile phones, Obama phones they called them. And people, there was one woman who was made famous on Alex Jones because they caught her in a moment where she wasn't thinking. When you actually spoke to this woman, she had an actual brain that she could use. But on the videos, it was, I got me a phone, Obama phone. I'm going to vote for Obama. He may give me more. So there it is. That's the mentality of the herd. You're always going to get the people like us who are going to go, shall we have a think about this? And that's when you're pummeled. Well, the trouble is, everybody's now become a hammer, so every solution, everything that they see is a nail. And they're just hammering everything down. The problem you've got, all these people, who I know a lot of them as well, who are rule followers, conformists, just do this and we'll get that. Just 10 minutes with me, man. Just this. It's those people that put people like me and you on cattle cars in history. It's not the bad people. It's the people who do nothing. You know, the Martin Niemöller quote, I didn't say anything when they came for the trade unionists because I wasn't the trade union. You get through all them, it didn't say anything. By the time they come for Martin, there was nobody left to say anything. So this is what I wanted this extension of the Webster Report to do, because I'm sick of arguing with idiots, Alex. And when you use the term idiot, people think you're being derogatory. I'm an idiot if I'm trying to participate in something I know nothing about. I'm acting like an idiot. Why are you doing that if you don't know what you're doing? Oh, everybody's doing it. That's an idiot. That's an idiot. So to not be an idiot, you learn. Oh, do I want to do that? No, I don't want to do that. So I won't be an idiot. Or, yeah, I think that's a good idea. I'll do it because if I do it this way, it'll work. I'm not an idiot. It's called thinking, that, Alex. It's how you disseminate things. It's called critical thinking. There's no critical thinking amongst at least the last two generations in the majority. It's just the taught what to think. You know, you ask him a question. A mate of mine demonstrated it perfectly. He was out with another mate of ours about 4 or 5 years ago, this, and I think they were in Liverpool, and they were looking for such a place, and they couldn't find it. Anyway, one lad gets his phone out and go, "Oh, it's this," and he starts directing him. And anyway, 15 minutes. It says it's a minute away. 15 minutes they've been walking round, can't find it. So he's going, "Oh, I'm sure I'm going to get it." And my mate just thought, "I've had enough of this." And he just went, "Excuse me, mate, do you know where such and such is?" He went, "Yeah, it's there." So after 15 minutes of looking for something on GPS, he went, "Can you tell us where this is?" "Yeah, it's there, mate." So straight away, all that of not being able to think, because that's all he could think of, my mate just went, "Do you know where this is?" And the fellow just went, "Yeah, it's there." So we're complicating everything. Now, if everything's so complicated, then we're going to believe complicated answers. That's where we fall down, because we then give over our defences to people who may not have our best interests at heart. So if I'm to understand that we've been to the moon, if I'm to understand that, I've got to believe in people who will tell me things and show me things, but not answer me questions. I've just got to take it. Yes, we've done that. Why? Because everybody believes it. Everybody. Okay, well, everybody believes in evolution, allegedly. Everybody believes in evolution. Everybody believes in a Big Bang because it's science. Mathematics tells us there was a Big Bang where something happened to nothing. And yet, I'm called a nutter because I believe in an invisible man with a beard in the clouds, they say. What's the difference, Alex? I'm believing in a man that's telling me things from a system that lies to me, debt-based economy, paying for gas. That's just one. Why wouldn't I ask across the blanket of the Big Bang, evolution, relativity, gravity, germs, all theory? All theory. Well, it's mathematics. Well, have you done the maths? No, I'm not good at maths. Well, if you do the maths, you'll find a mathematic answer. But where's that in the real world? Well, 100 years ago, we were told that science took a very dangerous tangent and they went down the route of theory. Anything's possible in theory, Alex. We can do anything in theory. But when we try and put it into the physics of this world, we find out whether it's real. Can we recreate it? Can we test it? Can we check the results? No. Why? Well, for some things, we need another mathematical equation like dark matter. What's it look like? Don't know. Have you seen it? No. Have we measured it? No. Can we weigh it? No, only maths. So it's not real. So we've taken a not real world and adapted it to a real world and say, well, that's how it works. Just because you don't understand it, it means we've figured it out yet. That's a silly way to work out science.
Well, from my point of view, without getting into two sort of controversial areas, I have a view of theories really that's quite simple. And theories are basically, for me, essentially just lenses.
Yes.
Because what we have to do, we have to make,
see what fits and see what doesn't fit.
Yeah, we have to make sense of experiences and phenomena. We don't always know whether those experiences, well, particularly the phenomena, the experiences are ours, obviously, because we're having them. But the phenomena, we don't know if they're just experiences that can be, reduced to our subjectivity, or whether they have some sort of objective existence outside of ourselves, and our experience is simply apprehending that phenomenon. So we don't always know where we begin and end, where our perception begins and ends. We use the word consciousness, really, and then we use the word unconscious. And we don't really know what these words are. They're just shorthand by which people can find a particular language so that they can then converse with each other. But we don't even know when they use that language, whether they mean the same thing when they use that particular assignation of a word or an idea.
Exactly. So, it's an accepted vocabulary. It's an accepted vocabulary and an accepted definition of most things. So I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to accept that. But the problem you've got with the English language is things like fear, right? Fear can mean a lot of things. People use it, you must fear God. Well, does that mean you should just run around being scared all the time? No, fear can mean honour. You're in that much fear, you're in reverence. You don't want to upset them. You're in fear of such a thing. Things like charity and love, right? In the Bible, they changed the word charity for love in the new versions. When you change the word charity to love, you've changed the entire context of that sentence and paragraph, because charity is very specific. If somebody can't read, write, walk, have a roof over their head, feed themselves, drink, you're compelled to give them charity. Give them what a basic human being is allowed. Everything. That's charity. You can love somebody like that and do nothing for them.
Yeah,
so that's the entire concept of charity.
Now that's interesting when you look at that in terms of the Bible, because, for example, you've got the original languages. But then if you take something like the New American Standard Bible, that is a translation, right, from the original languages. If you look at the New International Version, that's an interpretation, which is one level removed. What it does, it makes concessions to intelligibility so that people can absorb what it means better, but not feel too challenged by the text. Then you move from an interpretation to a paraphrase, like the Good News Bible, where basically just a bunch of nice, entertaining stories which have some vague connection with some underlying Aramaic, Greek, Hebrew, whatever. Ultimately, that you've got this potential degradation, and it's similar to what happened when this guy talks about hyperreality, called Jean Baudrillard. He's dead now, French sociologist, and he talks about reality is outside of ourselves, and then the representations of reality that we need, because obviously a direct exposure to reality, can be quite, should we say, challenging. An unmediated exposure to something real. Now, that in itself is worth thinking about a little bit. So, Baudrillard talks about representations, and the question about these representations of reality is, how faithful are they as a representation of the real? And over time, those representations can become degraded, decayed, and eventually become complete simulations. So it's a bit like you end up on the Star Trek holodeck, like in the second Star Trek movie, Insurrection. So basically, you're there in Insurrection, and you've been transferred to a holodeck, and it's a complete simulation, but you think it's real. Now, at that point, we are in Baudrillard's bad faith representation. It's a completely false reality. And it's the same happens with Bible translations. So you've got a translation which is a faithful rendition of the original, an interpretation which has lost something, which is trying to make some concession to a broader market, finding it a pleasing story to read, and then a complete paraphrase like the Good News Bible, which is largely for entertainment purposes only. And it's happening at all levels, and it's because humans, again, are choosing a lot of the time to live at a level that's very simple. Now, for example, just to get a little bit into theological territory, if you don't mind, but like biblically in terms of the Old Testament, this admonition in the first commandment, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. Now, that's a really good model for an holistic approach to one's understanding of God as existing somewhere outside of self. And of course, there's a sense in which then God exists also within the self. But realistically, these different dimensions, loving God with your mind, presumably if you're created as per the Genesis accounts, God gave you a mind. He made it powerful. It's a tool that can be used to achieve incredible things, including developing things like science that benefit the thing that was talked about in Genesis 1:28 about go out, be fruitful and multiply, and cover the whole earth, solve problems, challenges. How do I get across this ravine where there's a gap? How do I build a bridge across from here to here so I can go to the next territory? Oh, there's a juicy field over there. I think that looks better. Grass might be greener on the other side. So we were given, if you take that paradigm that God created human beings and created them with a mind, so it's heart, soul, strength, and mind. Strength, determination, diligence, will. So all the different aspects of a human being need to come together. It's important that we don't disparage any of them, but we keep them in a balance. And ideally, that's what we'll be able to do. Whether you believe in God or not, I think it's probably good advice that we give attention to our mind, what we think, and thinking better, thinking more efficiently, solving problems better, because that's the only way that problems go away. In that sense, by addressing them, coming up with ingenious solutions sometimes, because they're not just emotional problems that we have practical, real world problems that we often have to solve, but then problems of the heart, our human experience, what it is to connect with other people. People are like icebergs. It's so difficult to relate to other people when there's so much about them that you don't know. And, you get your own stuff under control, and then you've got to deal with these friends and lovers and others and family members who come into your life, and they're not the same as you. Learning to regulate your emotions, and then having an emotional response to your existence, to your experience, being thankful, being full of joy. These emotions are also important. So having determination and strength when you get knocked down and knocked down and knocked down, and you've been under lockdown for 18 months. Am I going to get up again, or am I going to commit suicide like so many have done? That resilience, that willpower, that determination. We've got to harness all those facets of what it is to be a modern 21st century human being, having our shit together, operating at the optimal level in all these areas of our lives, and encouraging each other to do the same. And when we do that, we won't just be passengers. We won't just be saying to these oligarchs, yeah, you tell us what to do next. We'll be saying to them, your model's deficient. We've got something better. And what we've got to do is start creating realities where we come together and we demonstrate to these people who are walking around wearing masks, right? Walking around wearing masks and getting vaccinated, right? Those people who are doing that without asking any questions, if they could see a reality that was more plausible than the one they're living in now, there might be a prospect that they might vote with their feet. But until we've got that, we've really got a backs to the wall sort of experience. So we have got to co-create with each other. And again, if you believe in God, you know, obviously from my point of view in the Christian paradigm, I see myself as a co-creator with the Almighty. Yeah. So then I'm co-creating. He's the architect with the blueprint. The blueprint's faulty. We need to excavate it. We need to dig it out, and we need to find that pristine blueprint. Where can we find it? Well, these are kinds of questions we can ask, Paul. Where do we find the blueprints? Where have aspects of the blueprints appeared? What are the sources? What do we do with them today? How do we retrieve the best of it? How do we keep in touch with the modern world so that we don't become like, you know, ostriches with their head in the sand saying, no, I don't want to go with what's happening in society. We can't just regress into a primitivism. We've got to get the balance, and we've got all the gifts and tools within ourselves as human beings to evolve, to grow, to expand, to do better, to love each other better, to solve problems better. So we better start doing it now, because if we don't, we're heading towards the edge of a cliff fast, because we've given our responsibility over to people who I believe don't have our best interests at heart.
The problem you've got, Alex, is you've got to explain. People have got to understand what part they're playing in with consent. You know, they don't understand how these people are getting consent. Everything is presumed in this jurisdiction, which is commercial law, civil law. Everything is presumed. The fact you say nothing means you've accepted it. So everything is based on that. So you've got to debunk everything, basically. Now, I have found something very interesting that I wasn't aware of. I am a believer in the two worlds in law can work together. So you've got the common law, which is the man, the harm or loss. Without that man, the monopoly piece, the straw man, can't be used unless somebody is claiming to have authority over that, because nobody else has authority over it. Because remember, Alex, me and you are classed as dead. Yeah. So somebody's got control of that. Somebody's holding it for us, perhaps, until we come back from sea. Somebody's holding on to it. Well, if you're lost at sea for so long, you're classed as dead. So I've always thought that, hello, if Paul can be recognised as alive and well and a man, I can then hold up Mr. Webster. Who has claim over Mr. Webster other than me? I'm alive. Who has claim? Nobody. How do we get to that? Somebody sent me something through the other day that pertains to expatriates who are claiming pensions, either from this country and living in somewhere else, or the opposite. And it's called a proof of life form. Proof of life form that will be notarized as you being alive. What could that do in a civil court where somebody's got a claim against you? Where's your agreement? Show me the agreement. Show me what I've signed. Show me what agreement. It's going to cause a lot of issues. Now, I've always said that if you got that recognised, that you've got teeth. You know, it was like when I was talking with David Robinson, God bless him. He was always common law. That's all we need. I can't disagree with him. I know he's 100% correct with it all. But it was that crossover. You know, they want you in their jurisdiction. You want them in yours. Neither can mix in completely. But there's a middle ground. There has to be. Because
Yeah, yeah.
for Mr. Webster to have an agreement, Paul must have initiated that agreement, or you're trying to claim an agreement that isn't there. So it opens up, and it's that constitutional challenge. It's the only way you're going to get it to be highlighted. People going into these courts and saying they're a free man or they're a man, it doesn't work. Putting it in paperwork, it won't work because it's all based on presumption. You've got to debunk everything on paperwork if you're going to participate. So that's why people say don't go into their courts. We went into their courts because we see the remedies within the statutes. Because if it's a monopoly game where I pick Mr. Webster up to use to go to the shop, Mr. Webster's bought a Mars bar, now Paul can eat his Mars bar. You use Mr. Webster to participate. That's all it is. It's an interface. Elon Musk, once you're connected to this interface, once you're connected to the internet of all things. So that means you're going to be wirelessly connected to not only your TV, your meter, your fridge, but to the grid. Now, is that fantastical or is that the Chinese model? I think it's pretty much the Chinese model. And that's here, coming in now. My local councillors are arguing with the council because Wigan Council have awarded a renovation contract for Wigan Town Centre to the Beijing Construction Company. Bolton Council have also given a contract to the Beijing Construction Company to renovate its town centre and to build homes. The Chinese Communist Party own 4 UK academies.
Yeah.
Why? Why? It's because we're going under a corporate communist dictatorship. It's nothing to do with countries and nations, people. It's business. The EU Withdrawal Act stated, Section 13, I think it is, that Parliament is sovereign. If Parliament is sovereign, what does that make you, Alex? Makes you an employee, that, mate. That means the jurisdiction has been completely flipped to the European jurisdiction that they wanted us to stay in Europe so they could implement. Guess what? They've implemented it anyway. And you've applauded most of it in. Everybody's crying about the NHS. They won't even see to me if I'm ill because I'm unvaccinated. Well, why, if I own it, why would you not see to me? It's because I don't own it. It's not public. 13.4 billion debt wiped out in March 2020. Whoever that debt was owed to are now the new owners. If that's us, brilliant. But I don't think it is, Alex.
No, yeah. Well, I think you're raising some good points, Paul, and hopefully, I mean, we do. I think it's no secret. Well, not between you and me, so I suppose I'm just revealing it now. But that we do aspire to do this with hopefully a weekly frequency, and start to advertise and get people chiming in. So there's loads of stuff I think that we'll be able to cover, including our shared sort of strengths and insights. I was just noticing, I think I saw, if I'm not mistaken, because I'm on my mobile phone, Paul, I think I saw a comment come up, but I can't see it now because I'm on my mobile. Was it from Jam? I think there was something. Yeah. What did it say?
Janet G, we only have our senses to guide us through this world, the senses that God gave us. We should trust them more than we do to navigate our lives.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jan. Much appreciated for that comment. And
I think what I didn't want this show to carry on doing was just to keep moaning and bitching and complaining. There are remedies out there, but people have got to do it for themselves. They can't. I mean, Alex, in 10 years, the amount of money that I've been offered to represent people in courts. No, you've got to do this yourself. I'll sit with anybody and talk. I have done for hours on end until it registers with people about different things. The gas, the bills of exchange. I sat with a guy, and over the period of a week, I bet we must have done 70 hours, 70 hours of talking over the period of a week or two. And he couldn't get it until that light went on. and that was it then. And he understood everything of how this economy works then. It's so simple. You know, I'm trying to put stuff together now for a video to try and make it as simple as possible. I think I've even I've mentioned it to you, Alex, that if I'm the government and you're the man who employs me, I need some taxes off you, Alex. So I come and take your taxes. With your taxes, I'm going to go now to British Gas. British Gas, how much for you to go and drill our gas, refine it, pump it into our grid, and then service and maintain our grid? It's going to cost so much a year contract. There you go, British Gas. There's our contract for British Gas UK. You're going to do that for us. I've taken your taxes. I've signed the contract. I've just paid them with your money, Alex. So now you must balance your share at the Treasury. So I send you a bill. You need to sign that, date it. So British Gas can now go, Mr. Brocklehurst's debt for this month has been settled. Set that off. That's it. That's it. Because you need to balance that, because I've used your money. You need to know where I've used your money. So British Gas tell you, and you sign it to say thank you for that. Now your debt's zero, because you'd already paid for it when I signed the contract with British Gas. So you must balance the book because I've used your money. That's the bit you don't know. So you're taught to promise to do something. So I go, you're not balancing it. Oh, we're going to have to take stuff off them. It's just easy way for me to take stuff. Alex Thompson of the UK column said in an interview with me once, I said, Alex, you were taught the bills of exchange at Eton by the age of 13. And his answer was, of course, Paul, how else will we steal all your equity and leave you with all the debt? And it's a simple matter of accountancy, not paying, not anything else, accountancy. We've used some of this money. There's your bill, Paul. That's what we've used it for. Are you happy with that? If you are, sign it and we can zero it and we can move forward to the next bill. That's how simple a debt-based economy is. But no, it's got to be more complicated than that, hasn't it? No, that's how simple it is. It's if you can reduce things to simplicity, you're not going to be correct 99.9% of the time. If you reduce law to its simplicity, you're always going to be correct. Harm or loss. If you're arguing, we're debating, we're arguing about controversy, we're wrong. And it's the same with the Bible. The Bible is law. I understood the gospel like that in writing. But it's that believing, wanting to believe. It's that bit in between. I want to believe, but you don't. So how can you move forward from that? I understand it basically. I understand the concept, but I don't understand it until it happened. And I suppose that's the faith that you can never impart to people. And I won't argue with people about it. If you don't believe in God and you believe in a Big Bang, great, you crack on with that. But I have very, very little faith in man. Very, very little faith in man. And I've got loads of works of man, but most of the works of man are very selfish, very greedy, very detrimental to people who haven't got that. But out of all the religions I've done, and I've researched them all, I've been inducted into the Tao because I've always known there's something after this life. I was doing mediumship. I was very good at mediumship. But I always came back to the Bible, and I stuck on that point, wanting to believe and believing. So the gospel. Do you believe I died for your sins? Yes. Stop being naughty and follow me. That's it. That's how simple it is. But you then bring in human emotions and then human intellect that wants interpretation of that. Not just take it as a child. Believe in me, follow me. Don't take it as that. Interpret it. And I think that's where we've found ourselves lost in ourselves, and then we've handed that over to people who we think are cleverer than us. And it's not. It's all in us. We can all do this. I can sit with a mathematician and he can explain concepts and I'll understand it. write the equations down, you're wasting your time. It's not my gift. I don't understand that. But if you understand that, I can take that concept and put it into something and create with other people. You were talking about working with God and creating that reality. Well, if you look at any decent civilization and its fundamental, when it was decent, it always started off with Christian parameters. You know, we all start with that, and then man goes, well, we could do this, and then we can do that, and then, you know, oh, we've got to show that we're praising God, so we'll build this idol and we'll call that God. Well, we've done all that. We come back full circle, and we're still here. So I think it was Solomon in the book of Solomon. It talks about how wise he was, and fundamentally, he did everything he wanted to do. Pleasures, building, money, gold, silver. He had everything, but he wasn't satisfied in this world. He never found satisfaction in this world. Satisfaction even in this world. There was nothing for him in this world. So the wisest man couldn't find satisfaction in this world. The wisest man of all of us ever. That's what Solomon is portrayed as. But we come along and now we know everything, and we know that this theory is correct, and we know that theory is correct. Just believe in us. Sorry, you've done a lot of lying. I'm not just going to believe in you. I'm going to ask you some questions. Then you get turned off. Then you can't ask this. Then you're put in jail. That's how history's gone when people start to stand up for themselves. And it's going to be no different, Alex. And I mean, we've done just over an hour, and we said we'd do an hour just to try and explain a bit that it's not just going to be about, I don't want paying the council tax, and it wasn't going to be like that. There's bigger questions than this, but you've got to be willing to ask the questions of yourself. Do you really know everything because you went to school and university and you put that mortarboard on your head? You know more than me. I can tell you now that I've had people who've got degrees coming out their ears who fell out with me, defriended me on Facebook. That's how serious it was, Alex. Defended me on Facebook because they disagreed with me. And because those people were fundamental in the persistence in proving me wrong, they actually went and learned something and proved me right and came and apologised. And I will take that from that man every day of the week, because he's a bigger man than most people I know who couldn't admit that they might not be right. I was willing for 10 years to say, I might not be right about this gas being free. I know it's not free, but it's a catch line for you to go and look. It's already paid for. Don't pay for it again with your cash. Don't do it. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be this way. I think I'm right. I went round the country doing conference talks. God knows how many radio shows. Nobody come and prove me wrong. They called me names, but you can't prove me wrong if I'm trying to show something that's right. You could maybe re-educate me and show me a different way, but nobody can. So I think fundamentally, Alex, I think we scratched the surface, but this is going to go theological, spiritual, and nuts and bolts, because if one thing that a human is, it's all that.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we're looking at what works in the world. So at the end of the day, for all the theories about everything, human beings, in order to function, need to have, reality operating. When I push this button or pull this lever, I can usually predict the results. That there'll be the results that I want. So we need a degree of mastery over our world, over our environment. And when you look at particularly, I think this is where it's interesting, because you've got the Genesis account, which is all about the, creation. Okay, so it's the creation of everything. It's including the creation. What's this here? I'm just reading this message here. Yeah. Okay. So you've got the creation paradigm. There it is in Genesis, and everything's created, including human beings and animals and so on and so forth. And then you have this experience of something called the fall. Now, even for people who don't want to be biblical literalists, yeah, you can see in that mythos that there's an issue about a perception that the world was created and then something came in and there was a corruption. So if people don't want to get down on their knees now, pray and invite Jesus Christ into their hearts, that's okay, right? Nobody's going to say, because that's the whole point about free will and the Bible. The bottom line in the Genesis account is that human beings were given free will to either accept or reject God. Yeah, so that's the bottom line. So it's up to us when we look at this whole picture. There's this world, this created world that humans inhabit. It started off, according to that mythos, pristine, and then it got corrupted. And when it got corrupted, our quality of life went downhill, went so fast. Women gave birth in pain. That was portrayed as a curse. The serpent was cursed. There was a curse upon the land. It was going to be hard to bring things about. Now, so something in that almost paradise state had become much harder. Now, it's still this creation, but it's become corrupted. The question then is, how would we turn that around within the mythos? Well, we work hard, we experience pain, but pain is a basis for realization. Pain is a basis. When we get pain, you get toothache. It's like, there's something wrong. Better get that seen to. So we don't naturally incline to want to have pain, but pain, in a sense, is a very real gift because it brings something to our conscious attention that needs addressing. So realistically, even that undesirable fall, that fragmentation, that dislocation from the goodness of that creation and become corrupted, ultimately provides a possibility or a foundation by which, in this corrupted reality, it's like what we see now with masks and vaccines, and so many people are just submitting. They're just submitting to diktat, rightly or wrongly. You look at it one way, it's rightly or wrongly, but they're submitting to diktat. Now, that logistically has huge implications, right? So in our free will and with our minds intact, with our senses and our faculties, we should be able to make intelligent judgments based on the facts, based on the data. We should be able to tell this doesn't add up. And whenever we can't do that, we might fall into a hole. We might incur pain. And that pain is instruction. So there's always a chance. There's always the flip side of pain, and you call it obviously sin within the Bible. The flip side of that is redemptive possibility, because through that pain, through that dislocation, through that loss of quality of life, we have a chance to feel and experience what we've lost, what's missing, and to reach out for it again. So everything that's negative even becomes a basis for us to realize and to wake up. So the question is, will people need a bucket load of pain to such a degree, a deluge, before they'll wake up? Well, human nature and the human condition tells us time and time again, usually the answer to that is yes. People need a hell of a lot of pain in order to wake up. They often have to have everything taken away from them. It's tragic, but that just seems to be the way it is. So these dramas, you can see it in this Genesis account of creation and fall. You don't need to go to Augustine in the Catholic Church to talk about original sin passed down through the seed of man. You don't need an elaborate theory like you say, Paul. You can just see from the basic mythos, a paradise scenario where things were easier, and then the pain of childbirth and other pain and murder and all the other things that came into the world that distort things. But even that provides us with a basis to wake the hell up. The question is, how do you want it?
Well,
and that's to all of us.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's that travail. It's those tribulations. Unless you get, people say, well, if I'm a good man and God loves everybody and he's compassionate, why would he do that to a good man? Well, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. There's a lot of good people who could miss the path of salvation, I don't know how people want to put it, but it's so subtle. It's so subtle what the machinations of what man has done to take people away. If you want to look at the basics, right, and we'll get into this theology when we start talking about religion, and people talk about Christianity and they get mixed up with Catholicism. Church of England. If you, let's take it as black and white. I know we don't do the black and white stuff because we're going to get into the debates on how people's minds work and how we're meant to maybe take this away. But the black and white stuff is that if you commit sin, you're gone. That's it. And there's only one way to stop that, because you're born with that sin. You can't get away from it. You come into this world, you're born with that original sin. The only way out of it is not through doing good deeds. Look at the scriptures. You can't do it through the Levitical system. You can't do it through sacrifice. You can't do it through good deeds. There's only one way. What do all the dispensational churches teach? Oh no, everybody's going to the same place. We just go in different ways. Well, when you look at Satanism, paganism, it's all the same thing. We're all going to the same place. We just do it different ways. There's only one way, according to Scripture, and that's through the cross. Only one way. So out of all the religions, saying all these things, and you've got the Pope inviting all the leaders of all the religions to the Vatican, where they've unveiled a statue of Molech. So we've got all that going on there, and then in Scripture it says there's only one way. You must stop what you're doing, stop all that, come this way. Nobody does it because it's so simple. That's the simplicity of stop that, go that way. We can't do it because we have all these interpretations of our own man. We get lost in these brain-sick fantasies of our own. Well, I think God meant this, and I think God meant that. I've never been that confident to say I think what God meant to say. It's beyond the realms of understanding of me being able to speak to another man, even including yourself, Alex. We can only debate and thrash it out and throw it on the threshing floor and see what's left. Because if we take it as fundamental, if we say, right, that God is real and the Bible is true, 99% of people are gone. And it says many will be called, few will be chosen. Now, does that mean some will be chosen because of certain things, and then the rest can find out? Because the ones who are chosen are going to be able to impart things to help teach the people the fundamentals, again, of Scripture, of Bible, of Christianity, without all the man-made stuff. Maybe that's what it is, because when again, we'll get into it, Alex, but we've debated it before that according to Scripture, it's black and white. Boom, you're dead, gone forever. You lot are left, but only if you've believed in Jesus and you're following the commandments. Nobody's doing that, apart from a very few. So if it's black and white, that means everybody who's saved is going to be able to know everything and praise God, and that means we're going to do nothing wrong. Well, that means that everything we've learned is never going to get passed on, because everything is just going to be different according to the black and white. So that's where, when we've got the black and white of Genesis, this is the schematic diagram of the design for life from a living creator. When you put Enoch 1 to that, when you put the book of Esdras to that, you suddenly get a schematic coloured in to a 3D image, which goes 4D, 5D, because of all the additions that you get to it. But in all those additions, there's little snippets of things like what I was talking to you about before, where you've got the righteous and then you've got the elect. And they seem to be describing two different types of peoples. You've got the people who've never done anything wrong, and then you've got the ones who are elected, but they're not in position yet. Well, that's because you're not quite been forgiven. You have done things wrong. I hold both my hands up. I haven't got a clue how this stuff works. But the factor is, I've never had the confidence to be able to sit and talk openly about this before, because if you was to say, yeah, I believe in Jesus, you would have been harassed, you'd have been harangued. But now we're meant to be in a tolerant society. So you should be able to say this. But you talk about Christ and Scripture, you were shit on straight away because of all the other religions. You know, Buddhism, love everybody, let them do what they want. Just love them. It's their path, just love them. Well, do what thou wilt. That's Satanism. So if we can't start talking about this, potentially there's many people who are going to get lost and they're looking for the right way. That's basically how it seems to look. What do you think on that, Alex?
Well, yeah, I mean,
I know it's a lot to go into as we're just going to end the show, like, but it's
well,
stuff that we want to
yeah,
talk about.
the way I'd parallel it is, I'm interested in wisdom traditions and how people live a wise life. Now, the Old Testament had a fairly pronounced wisdom tradition. So the book of Job asks some interesting questions. And also the book of Ecclesiastes. So the book of Proverbs had a very simple formula. It's a bit like the original formula for prophets was a true prophet, or should we say the prescription for a false prophet, was if somebody prophesied not in the name of Yahweh, then they were a false prophet. Then the next thing they added on was if somebody prophesies, even in the name of Yahweh, and it doesn't come to pass, then they're also a false prophet. So what we had was we have an experience behind these prescriptions that said, look, this is how kind of God works. Yeah. He needs to work in these ways, and we need these equations or principles because they were dealing with human experience. Now, everything was fine while those prescriptions worked. But when you came across the first example of where it didn't work, right? So, for example, Job's a righteous man and he's done everything right. There's no question. All his comforters come along when he's afflicted and they say, well, there's got to have been some secret unrighteousness on some level that you've done. And in the end, in the story, God vindicated him. And he wasn't best pleased with these three comforters because it wasn't about that. There was a new level of experience that was coming in. And the book of Proverbs was based on the prosperity theology of Deuteronomy. If you do the right thing, God will reward you. And if you do the wrong thing, God will basically dispossess you by the other nations. Now, that's fine as long as that story arc works. But in human experience, sometimes there started to be these exceptions that couldn't be explained away by these rules. So then these more sophisticated wisdom traditions appeared where people started to struggle. Like Jacob wrestled the angel at Peniel, right? We start to grapple in our humanity with when the simple answers don't seem to work, because it isn't just about belief being simple, giving assent to a proposition or a belief. It's when does this not align with the experience I see all around me? Some of the prophets who've been praying for a long time, like Habakkuk, he said, how long, O Lord, until you hear? So there were long periods of time sometimes where people were in agony of soul, praying for outcomes according to all the righteousness that they knew. They were appointed prophets of God according to that prophetic text. And yet there was still this shortfall where there wasn't always this answer. There wasn't this idea, oh, this God who intervenes in the world when you pray and he just does it. Well, what happens when you pray and it doesn't happen? Then people have to start thinking about, how do I make sense of that? That becomes apologetics. It becomes an area in which we develop a theology to explain, oh, well, that's because God is teaching you a lesson through your suffering. And so there's no question that human experience is developed in relationship to our understanding of God, and our mechanisms and ways of understanding life and experience are connected to the way we apprehend God. Just like when we stand and we observe a beautiful sunset, how do you describe that aesthetically? You're moved in soul, you feel all these feelings, and maybe you give thanks to God. Maybe you don't, but maybe you're experiencing the same sense of awe and an overwhelming sense of, wow, adrenaline in the system, that's beautiful. But then somebody attributes that to a particular religious tradition and some doesn't. We have to argue back from our own experience onto a belief system. But wisdom traditions, Old Testament are pronounced wisdom traditions. New Testament doesn't have any equivalents, but Jesus did come out with some wisdom sayings. And one of them, they were basically prescriptions for life. So I've talked about this, obviously, with yourself and with other people, where be quite a bit who know me well, about when Jesus talked about the narrow path that leads to life, and few are those who find it, and the broad path that leads to destruction, and many are those who enter by it. Now, you don't need to unpack the detail at this stage, because you can say, oh, that correlates to my experience. You can see it now with the whole situation in the world, the vast number of people who are just on this very broad path, ploughing forward towards the cliff edge, voluntarily having anything put into their system, medically, physically, wearing masks, all this stuff that they're doing by free will, by the way. Even though they're feeling under pressure, they're all doing it voluntarily. They're voluntarily on that path together en masse. And then there's a small number of more individuated thinkers on a narrow path trying to not be on that path. And the ones on that path and the government on that broad path are trying to drag more and more of the individuals on the narrow path onto the broad path. So very simply there, you've got a correlation between something Jesus said in the New Testament to things we can see happening now in the world. So you can just leave it actually and allow that story, because that story has got many, many different layers, many, many different levels of meaning. And we need to allow that story to edify us and to think about it and reflect upon it, because it's got much to teach us. There's no simple prescription. There's a very simple contrast. And that's the challenge to people. Are you on a path, that unique path, where in your totality of life, within your particular story, you've got a connection with the one who made every path? Or are you on a broad path with a blindfold on and a mask on, heading to the infirmary or the clinic or the edge of the cliff, saying, I don't care, everybody else is having it done, I'll go with them? So for me, yeah, there is sometimes a black and a white. There is sometimes this path or that path. But even on those paths, there's a lot of interesting colours and shades and different hues. So that's the way I'd see it, Paul. Yeah, definitely. The narrow path and the broad path. And the challenge is to people, which one are you on?
Exactly. And like I was saying just before we come on air, it's the simplicities of this. I mean, you were talking about the prosperity gospel there. You do the right thing and you'll get rewards. But that doesn't always happen. You brought up Ecclesiastes. That's what Ecclesiastes talks about. This is like they call it in Scripture in Hebrew. It's hevel, which is it's not. A lot of interpretations say that means meaningless, which it doesn't. It's smoke. It's vapor. It's as if it's not real. You try and touch it and it just disappears. And that is life, because yesterday, as much as people might have enjoyed yesterday because England won a football match, you can't recreate yesterday. It was yesterday. It's only a memory. So it was a. I'll tell you what. When I started to study Ecclesiastes, what came to mind? Have you seen the Harry Potter films?
Yeah.
Have you seen the one where he stands at that fountain and with his wand, he takes a thought out of his head and puts it into the water, and it drops and it forms this, and he sticks his face in it and he's there. That's this world. That's this world. We've come from wherever into this world. And, when we come out of the womb, Satan is waiting with all his treasures for us. Would you like this? Would you like that? Would you want to do this? What about that? You could do this as well. You could do. So everything's there for us from being kids. If Satan has got your parents and their parents, and Satan's got them into his system, you're going to sin. So what about when that contrast, where some God Bible basher comes in and starts giving you the contrast, and all of a sudden you start looking at it? Well, that now needs to either be killed and destroyed, which how many times has Christianity been attempted to have happened to it throughout the centuries? Or do you start taking some of Christianity and incorporating it with your pagan satanic stuff? Bit like, yes, oh look, let's praise Jesus on the cross. He died for our sins. Let me put my Christmas tree up. That is two houses, Alex. That's Satan's house, paganism, and Jesus' house. Those two can't mix. And if we're mixing them in this world, we're not understanding it. That's what Scripture says. But if I say that to people, I'm oh God, I wouldn't like to invite you round at Christmas. It's like you're pissing on people's parades. And you're not, you're actually saying, we should have a look at this. It could be bad. It could be really bad for us. I come in from the outside and it's pissing down, it's raining. And my mate's going out, hey, you need to put a coat on, pal, it's raining. And he says, oh, bollocks, you knobhead. And he goes out, he gets wet. I had some information that he may have not used still, but it might have influenced his decision making on that particular occasion. And I'm telling you now, Alex, if you believe in man, good luck. Because we are liars, we are evil, we are capable of the most inhumane things, but the best of things as well. And we're capable of both. And if you don't know the dark, you're not going to be capable of knowing the light. So how do you know everything that you do is great? Because there's a law. There's laws that are set that tells you good from bad. Most people know it here, good from bad. We don't have to be taught it because that's God's law. But we have a choice. We have a choice to do it or we don't. Now, before the law, was there such a thing as sin, Alex? Before the law? No, there couldn't have been sin before the law because it's the law that tells us the naughty things that we shouldn't do. So before the law, we did everything we wanted. Then the law come in. Did the law save us? No, the law showed us what we do wrong. So what saved us? Only one thing. Jesus. That says it from the Old Testament through Enoch to the New Testament. That's the oldest writings we have. But people go, yeah, but man wrote it. And then, the Romans did all this. Well, the basics writing that we've known for the longest period tell us something different. And I guarantee that if you go and read those words yourself, if the words speak, they'll speak to you. If they don't, they don't. But the amount of people who will say, that's a load of shit. God doesn't exist, blah, blah, blah. I've had it done to me recently. It's a load of rubbish. Have you read the Bible? No. Well, let's not even start a debate then. Because I wouldn't debate you on rugby if I hadn't read a bit about rugby or watched some. It'd be useless, it'd be pointless. And it's the same with this. Do I expect you to read it and become a believer? No, because I've read it loads and I didn't understand what that believing meant until what we spoke of earlier, Alex. I lost everything. I had nothing else. There was nothing for me in this world, and I went, I'm done. I want to go home. I give up. And that's when I had my experience, and that's moved on exponentially from there. And I'm not the same animal as I was. You can't explain that.
There are certain ways in which we can take positive developments in scholarship and actually learn something interesting from them. So, like, for example, in the scriptural position, basically, so there's a movement in the early 1970s by a couple of guys, and the main guy was called Hans Fry, and he was at Yale Divinity School, basically. And in the past, there have been all these problems that were created between the idea of God acting in history, and that was called revelation empiricism, that God revealed himself through historical events, people of Israel, and so on and so forth. And it started a whole sort of trend of looking at archaeology and how archaeology could verify an actually existing people of Israel and all these different things. And the first verifiable find was called the Meneptah stele that was discovered in 853 BC, and it had an inscription of Ahab on it, and it was the first point at which a correlation could be made between history told from a biblical perspective and secular history. That was 853 BC. So after the advent in the early 20th century of a lot of the forms of biblical criticism and ideas by a guy called Albert Schweitzer called The Quest of the Historical Jesus in the late 19th century, Rudolf Bultmann, this guy came along and started to say, well, since the Enlightenment, there've been all these changes now in culture. We don't kind of believe the stories in the way we used to, because this scientific thing's kicked in, it's changed our view of how everything works. So Bultmann developed this idea and he called it fideism, right? Which is basically, it's to do with, fideism basically in Latin just means faith. And it was an attempt to address some of the problems that there were in Revelation empiricism, where there was a tension between historical finds and the biblical accounts, and they were struggling to explain them from the point of view of secular history. But what happened, the outcome of that, basically, in the 1970s, Hans Frey developed this idea called realistic narrative. So basically, realistic narrative was something that Frey talks about. So when you read the Bible, essentially, say you read the story of Moses, as soon as you read that story, even though it's related, say, to a particular historical epoch, and a scholar might say, oh yeah, when was that? Was that 1250 BC or whatever? Once you read that story, its reality, when you read it, creates a world, and you can enter into that world. So it doesn't have to be actually any longer connected to the historical events which brought the story about. The story begins to exist completely independently of every person who was involved in the production of the text, any of the history that was related to people transcribing the text into a final document in a process. Once it exists independently as a story, then we can inhabit that story, and then God, revelation of truth can come through that story, so that once that world is created and you read those stories, it reinforces and it creates that world in real time, and that's a world that you are then living in. And then by implication, we're all creating our story as we go along. So the past, some event like the redemption of the people of Israel, the Hebrews at the Exodus, it's gone. Christ, resurrected, passes into the transcendence of God. It's gone historically. So the question is, how do we inhabit a living present as that present is real, meaningful, and enables us to have some point of contact with God? And it's realistic narrative helps us to do that, because what it tells us is, whenever you read any biblical stories now, you're choosing to create and recreate a story that you can live in now, and you can shape that story in your experience now. That's the only way that it can continue to live. It's got to live in our minds and our hearts and our experience and in our actions. That's why you would read the Bible. So it isn't the fact that we say, oh, that was historically true, and therefore, because it's historically true, I say I believe it's historically true, therefore I have some credit in the bank of God. It's, I read these stories because I want to be reminded of these truths that are important to me about the nature of the world and my place in it. And as I keep reading those stories, we're creating that in real time, and we participate in it, in our own story. So that, for me, is one of the ways to solve a lot of the problems that we have in the modern world, and the tension that we have in interpreting texts that are quite ancient. The stories are alive now whenever we read them. We're connected with them. They become a part of us. We become a part of them. And then we can build our life in an ongoing way as part of our own story.
This is something that you touched on the other day when we were talking. Just 1 second. I can't answer that. I'll get shouted at for not answering this phone, but I'll give you a bell back in a minute when we're finished. Sorry, what were you talking about when I got distracted?
You were saying there was something the other day that I was mentioning. Was it Romans 13? Was it the changes that we've encountered in Romans 13 between governance, where Paul said governance is sent by God, but actually we can see now that governance does not seem to be sent by God? Because it was about how the ongoing authority of the Bible can be active in our lives through, having a storied approach to it, rather than.
I think it's because when you go back to the Old Testament, I mean, we're children now, Alex. We're children. We're still learning. We think we know a lot because academically we might be a bit more intellectual, but we're certainly not the most we've ever been, because that education system keeps us back as children. We've never been allowed to develop enough to create that society where we would work with a creator, because it's all kept in the copy. Do you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
Satan's world, this world is a copy of what God's is, so it's got to be all mechanical. Well, everything dies here, everything degrades, everything, because it's not real. So if we're investing in this life, we're never going to get satisfied, because it's always going to collapse. And so you're going to end up, when you die, you're going to end up with that want. You're going to want that want of satisfaction that you're never going to get. You know, how many times have we heard it where people have had after death experiences where they're drinking and they can't drink enough because they can't satisfy the quench of thirst because they're in hell. And they realise that everything that they've always wanted and ignored that creator who could have given it them, they've looked for it all themselves. And that's what we are told that we can be. We can be like God. No, we're an image of God and we can work with God. But if we want to work on our own, go on then, see what happens. And look what's happened. So I think it's about us being children. I think it's about time we accept we're still kids. Because if you read the Bible all the way through, from the Old Testament all the way through, yes, we've got books that were stacked either side of the straight line, you know, like Enoch and things like that, that they don't really want you to read, because it might give you a different perspective and you might join a few things. But if you read it as one long story, then it's like what you were saying. The true thing for us is to work with that creator, but work at, instead of us seeing the real creation and interacting with it, the education system and the oligarchs have kept us in the cave watching the allegory, which is what you were talking about the other night.
Yeah, that comes back to hyper reality and how are we grounded again? But yeah, so I think, yeah, well, we've covered a lot of bases, Paul. I think today we were just thinking doing an introduction, but I think we've done more than that.
We have done more than that. It's something I end up doing, Alex. I can come on. I'm just having a quick conversation with you, and an hour later, it's because there's so many tangents for us to go off on, and some people call them rabbit holes and stuff like that. But it's not so much as the rabbit holes, because the warren is one big warren. It's go down the rabbit hole. Just don't sit down there. Don't stay down there. Because when you get there and you start saying or repeating everything, it's time to put that down. Let's go and look at something else. We know where that rabbit hole is, because at some point you'll be in another rabbit hole and you go, I know how that joins with that rabbit hole now. And that's all that you can do. What I wanted to start joining is the possibility of prophecy and scripture coming into this reality and glaringly showing us. We've had conversations now that just on one prophecy with the mark of the beast, right? The New Testament says, if you don't take the mark of the beast, and everybody's saying, well, is it this vaccine? Is it this? Let's not get debating on that just yet. But the mark of the beast, you won't be able to buy or sell if you don't take it. They want us in a cashless society where they want us to have a microchip skin graft. Bill Gates has the patent for that. Without Bill Gates' microchip, I can't buy or sell in the new normal society. And his patent number is 060606. In numerology, you don't count the zero. Are they literally taking the piss? Or are they trying to fulfill prophecy to show us something that they can then manipulate? Or is it being fulfilled and they're going to try and manipulate it, i.e. Jeremy Vine on Newsnight talking about an alien invasion? What would you do? Well, when they did this with 7/7, nobody mentioned 7/7 yesterday, by the way. Nobody on social media was talking about Islamic extremists blowing things up on the anniversary of 7/7. It was all COVID. So are we being danced down a path? Possibly. Because at some point, if we are being danced down that path, they're going to have to produce a man who's going to be so articulate, so caring, so loving, and announce world peace. That's how much articulate they're going to have to be on that if they are pushing it. Because if they are pushing it, that comes out as prophecy anyway, because that's when we'll see the end come quickly. And I can't get away from the fact that everything seems to point to end times. And quickly, you were talking about archaeology and scripture. If anybody wants to go and look at the claims and the artifacts that a guy called Ron Wyatt started to uncover from the late 70s through the 80s and 90s, you will see Ron Wyatt claiming he's discovered Noah's Ark. That's now been mapped with radar, everything. They've excavated it. They pulled petrified wood out of this bolt-shaped artifact. They pulled petrified dung out of this. So it's questions, it's information. He then goes on to claim he's found the Ark of the Covenant. The Israelis announced that they found things in the 90s. Go and look. Go and look at what he's claimed. Because he's found Sodom and Gomorrah as well, documented. Who knows? But these are claims with a lot of good information. They've all been cordoned off. Nobody can get in unless you apply for application, blah, blah, blah. You can't even get onto Mount Sinai because it's in the Turkish province and it's guarded. So we've got to be able to ask these questions. Why is all that going on? Shh, if it's not real. Just show us. Just show us and show us how silly we all are. But you don't get that, do you? So this is why I wanted us to start this debate, because when you talk about real life and scripture, the two can't mix in this reality, apparently. You know, you're an idiot. Well, I think there's a lot more idiotic things people are believing in at the moment. You know, a bit like, yeah, inject yourself with this and everything's going to be okay. Oh, no, it's not. You know, let's vote for Labour because I think Labour are going to do a lot more now because look at what the Conservatives done. Punch and Judy, mate. Oh, no, yeah. Oh, yes, it is.
Yeah, exactly. Consensus reality, and that's what we're going to try and break out of.
It is, mate. Anyway, thanks for today, Alex. I know you've been on a tight schedule, and I hope your book, after having to do the adjustments with it, I hope that's all going through, and you can advertise it on the next show, and we can start getting people to debate real topics from real theology. I mean, you said theology is a way of us to try and understand Scripture. Well, we don't always have to try and understand it. Sometimes we can just take it for what it actually says, you know. But maybe it's not that black and white, but unless we talk about it, we can never get there. And there's so many excruciating debates to have, you know, about being a Bible follower and a Christian. Suddenly it makes you, to others, it makes you judgmental on anything. And I'm not a judge. I'm not a judge. I follow the Christian doctrine, the doctrine of Christ I follow, but I'm not a judge on that. People are people, they do what they do. But if you don't go and look and we don't talk, then nobody will ever get saved. So,
conversation, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for today, Alex. Like I said, we're going to have a lot more. We haven't got a set date yet, but we'll be looking towards next week, and we'll be in touch. So, thanks for today, Alex.
Cheers, Paul. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Catch you later. Bye for now.
So, guys, thanks for today. It's like I said, it's been a show that's been long in the making. We didn't really even know where we were going to start with this, but we knew once we got started, things would just start to develop, and this isn't going to be so much of a structured thing. We might have subjects and topics that we are going to pull apart, and we are going to use scripture as well, because we've got to open this debate, because there's more than this world. Whether you think it's the universe that you can order things off, I don't care. There's more to this than what we know. And we've got to be able to talk to each other without calling each other names. I'm sick of it. And I want to do something proper. So thanks for everybody in the chat room. I know I get distracted and don't get to the chat much, but thanks for everybody who's been able to tune in live. I didn't expect, we've had 27, 30 people at the most listening live, so I'm hoping that as this develops, we're going to have more debate and maybe even get some people in on the show with questions. Again, ask as many questions as you can. I'll try and get to them, but I get wrapped up in the show. Hopefully, if it starts to pick up, there'll be some moderators in there that I can trust to get us some questions and that. So it's been a difficult one for me this today from the personal stuff I'm going through at the minute. But I'd like to thank you all again, and keep up the fight and keep up the questions. That's all we can do. God bless, guys.